Hi, I am Sal Mercagliano, your host of What's Going On with Shipping. If you're new to the channel, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come on. So there was a report of a fire on board Royal Caribbean's Quantum of the Sea on September 1st. Got a little attention, obviously, for the fire on board. Saw a lot of tweets and information coming out about it. What I want to do is give you a mariner perspective of what a fire on board a ship means if you're sailing as a passenger. I've been on cruise ships. I go on cruise ships. I'm, not opposed to them in any way. So I'd like to give kind of an unbiased opinion of what I've read so far, what this fire entails, and why you should know a little bit more before you go on a cruise ship. All right, let's jump into it. So, Quantum of the Sea is the third largest cruise ship by gross tonnage in the world, lead ship of a 5-ship class built in Germany at the Meyer Werft shipyard. But these ships are just behemoths. They are huge vessels. And obviously, it doesn't matter the size of any vessel. A fire at sea is the worst thing that can happen. The fortunate thing is there's a lot of preventive measures that are in place to prevent fires from spreading the way they have in past. So this is Quantum of the Seas right here. Shows her exact position. She's heading southbound right now out of Alaska. You can see her itinerary here. She sailed from Seattle on 29 August, got up to Ketchikan on 31 August, got out of Sitka on 1 September, and then was heading for Juneau on 2nd September. Now, she had the fire on the evening of 1 September after leaving Sitka. And the fire took place, according to reports, at the aft end of the vessel, which we're going to look at here in a minute. But first, I want to look at the deck plan. So when you see deck plans for a ship, they're showing you the commercial space, the rooms, the lounges, all the places you can go on the ship. What they're not showing you, for example, is the engine and crew spaces. Now, one of the unique things about modern cruise ships is every room you can ever rent on a ship is above the waterline. I mean, there's nothing below the waterline on these vessels because these ships have amazingly very little below the waterline. They draw 30 something feet of water. So you're only talking about, again, 3 decks below the waterline of these vessels. And what's usually below the waterline is obviously engine rooms, fuel tanks, crew spaces, places that and storerooms. Those are places that are not available. So when you get lower and lower in the ship, you see less and less crew passenger rooms for you because they're taking up by crew spaces. Also, it's always important to know where the engine room is in the ship, and it's very easy to tell on this ship. As you go up here through decks 6, 7, and 8, if you look at how the crew, how the passenger spaces are, see this little bulge right here in the middle. This is where the ship stacks are upgoing. This is where the trunk for the ship stacks go. So the engine room is straight down here. So you're talking about right around this area here. And these ships will have multiple engine rooms. You'll have the diesel engines for ship propulsion, and then you'll have diesel engines for powering everything on the ship. So engine rooms are deep down in the bowels of the ship, the very bottom of the ship. The fuel tanks are on the bottom of the vessel. Those are the double bottoms below them, but there are machinery and equipment spaces scattered throughout the vessel. Now, the fire for this ship was reported in a specific area, aft decks 4 and 5. Here's the initial report from Maritime Bulletin. Cruise ship Quantum of the Sea suffered fire on the evening of September 1st, extinguished by the crew in an hour. Passengers weren't alerted or notified, and that caused some discontent. Understood fire was in engine room area and probably some utility compartments. Accident was reported by Cruise Law News outlet. Everybody interested is invited to study this rather extensive piece with many details, tweets, etc. All right. First off, it wasn't in the engine room area. I can tell you that much right now based on where the fire was reported. Remember where I told you where the ship's engine room is? It's basically just aft of the center of the ship. That's not where this fire was reported. They also notice here it says that the passengers were not alerted, although there were conflicting reports on this. It did come out that the passengers were alerted because one of the things the crew did was try to get the passengers out of the area where they're working the fire. And understand, on a ship, there's a couple of crews you deal with on a passenger ship. The crew you deal with on a consistent basis is the hotel staff. It is not the operating crew of the ship. Yes, you will see the officers running around. They've got gold braid on, they've got their stripes on. You see a lot of people, but most of those are hotel staff. The deck crew, which is up on the bridge, the engine crew, which is down in the engine rooms and the auxiliary engine rooms and the machinery rooms, you rarely see. Every now and then you'll see some of them jumping around in like overalls, working on gear, and you'll see them at official receptions where they come out. But most of the time, you never see them because they're the ones who are making sure the ship's getting from point A to point B and everything is running safe on the vessel. And during a fire, they're the ones who are going to be involved in the fire. Very few of the hotel staff are directly related in fire suppression. They have support roles, largely getting passengers out and doing things like muster stations and support roles, but very few of them are going to be directly involved in fire suppression. So let's go ahead and look at this report that was referenced in Maritime Bulletin. So this is Cruise Law News. This is Jim Walker's site. Jim Walker is a member of Walker and O'Neill Maritime Lawyers, and they are the bane of existence to the cruise lines. They're the Jim himself is the one who will always target when the cruise lines are doing something wrong. And I will back Jim up lots of times because sometimes the cruise lines are doing things that need attention and they can get away with them because they're foreign companies. And so Jim is a big advocate. And he posted this piece here because he's got great inside information. And I want to note this. So he got this from a crew member who's on board. And this is what I want to break down for you. So fire on Quantum of the Sea last night in the engine room casing in Zone 5, multiple decks. Bravo announcement, code to alert crew to a fire or other serious incident on board without alarming passengers at approximately 8:50 p.m., then again a few minutes later. So ships will have codes. You don't want to scream fire, fire, fire across the loudspeaker. You'll do that on a commercial ship where you're just telling the crew, but when you have passengers on board, you don't want to cause a panic. And so you're going to use codes at this time. And so Bravo is an indication of the type of fire or what's going on. When the theater let out, passengers were met with fire crews rushing down the stairs. Passengers were visibly a bit panicked. Yes, they would be if you saw crew running around. I had a chief mate always told me that if you saw him running anywhere, don't ask questions, just follow him. So that's going to cause you a little bit of concern. Kilo announcement. This is the Royal Caribbean general signal for crew to report to their emergency stations shortly after 9 p.m. So 10 minutes after the initial call, they're telling the crew to go ahead and head to their emergency stations, with crew running down hallways with emergency vests on. Deck 6, aft passenger cabins evacuated, and deck 5 closed past aft elevators. Okay, I'm going to break this down a little bit more for you, but what they're trying to do is isolate potential spread of the fire. So this fire is being reported in several areas. There was an initial tweet that said deck 4 or 5. Number one, it's not deck 5. Deck 5 is the huge theater on the stern of the ship. And if the theater goers are getting out, they would have seen a fire. This fire was taking place below that deck. And so what they want to do is make sure the fire doesn't extend. If it does, above, it will lap up. It will go up. Fires go up. And so what you want to do is start evacuating people out of those decks. And so they started moving them out of deck 6 and aft of the aft elevators. Now, cruise ships, like all ships do, have these huge, massive steel fire doors. You will see them on the ship, but you will never see them in use unless they're triggered. They're held by huge electromagnets. And from the bridge and from other stations throughout the ship, you can trip them and those doors will shut. And the idea is they perform a fire barrier. They prevent the fire from lapping into different sections. You do not want to be anywhere near those doors when they let go because they're going to come crashing down. And what you're trying to do is isolate the areas. And that seems to be exactly what the crew is doing, as I'll show to you here in a second. Passengers were advised not to use the aft elevators. If they were smart, they would shut down those aft elevators, but they also may have put them into a mode whereby only crew could use them to prevent people getting in the elevators. They're not worried about people getting trapped by fire. What they're worried about is electrical outlets and electrical hazards may trap people in them. Now, if the fire gets out of control, yes, that's an issue they have. Captain Cruise Director made a few announcements stating there was a fire and crew members were working on it. I can't tell you how important it is on cruise ships to provide information to the passengers. Don't leave them in the dark. The most famous case of this is Costa Concordia. And when the captain came on and said there was an electrical problem when they had run into Europe and had a rock smash through the hull and they were sinking, and basically did not tell them to the passengers, and resulted in 32 people being killed. I have no compassion for that captain of that vessel. Around 10 p.m., they announced the fire was out and they were working on clearing the areas to open again. Just a little excitement for the evening. This morning, we arrived in Juneau a little early, but other than that, it seemed business as usual. All right, I'm going to take you over to this picture here. This is the stern of Quantum of the Sea. So let's talk a little bit about this. Deck 5 is the deck the lifeboats are on. So here are your lifeboats. Back here, deck 5 and 6 is the huge theater that's on the vessel. See the smokestack up here? This is the one that goes all the way straight down through the center of the vessel, down into the engine room. Deck 4 is just below, and you'll see there's a walkway here, and then this entire area below is enclosed. And what this tells me is that this is a service area, no portholes, there's no crew. I mean, every cabin on a cruise ship has portholes, not portholes, but windows, if not a balcony on them. So when you see a cruise ship and it doesn't have anything, that tells you that this is a service area. Deck 3, which is right here, even with the Royal Caribbean, is where the mooring lines are. Now, there are a lot of fires that take place on that deck for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of electrical equipment on there. It's an open air space, even though it doesn't look like it. But there are generators, there are mooring lines, there are electrical gear on board. And so the fire could have taken place on deck 3 or 4 aft. One of the reasons why they were getting the passengers out of the spaces, out of the theater, and then heading down those aft stairwells back to the area. The engine room is not here. Let me be clear. The engine room is not down here. It's in the center part of the space. Down low is part of the engineering compartments that go to the azipods, which basically turn the screws of the ship, and along with controlling the propulsion and thrust of the vessel. So deck 3 is the mooring lines. Deck 4 is that deck just below this. And again, I tried to get it, but cruise lines are very controlling on specs on what is actually in these private areas of the ship that they don't open up. But again, if this is the huge theater area on the stern of this vessel, there will be a lot of spaces down here for the performance crews, for lighting, for all the elements that go to work for the theater space. Remember, these are big, huge floating hotels. So a lot of areas associated with that. And let's go ahead here, because then you get the infamous tweets that start coming out here. And again, you could pull these up, just do a search on Twitter, Quantum of the Sea, and you start pulling this up. I am hearing there's a fire on Royal Caribbean Quantum of the Sea in Sitka, and guests are getting zero info other than the fire is on aft deck 5. Again, I think it's below aft deck 5 because that's the theater space. People are evacuating floors, and many have no clue what's going on. I have dear family on the ship. What is going on? So again, the first thing that Royal Caribbean is going to do is inform people on board, not people who have family members on board. This comes out, still no info. Apparently, they keep shifting from one end of the boat to another. Elderly folks with limited mobility, not getting help, and no info. Okay, let me be clear. They are moving people from the aft end of this vessel. I find it hard to believe that people were moving from the forward end back to the aft. I mean, it was very clear where this incident is happening. And that amount of information you start hearing secondhand from people, and this is coming secondhand here, you can't really go by it very well. Again, elderly people, this is an issue. You're on a ship. You're not on land. There needs to be concern about this, but understand the primary function of the operating crew of the ship is to extinguish that fire and get it out. The hotel staff should be there to provide it. And it's really important that you build that network with some of the hotel staff to ensure that if you need assistance, it's there in case of an emergency. Next was one that was really, to me, I'm not sure. So the Dower put this out: fire on my Alaskan cruise last night, all evacuated to the forward when unable to contain it. like they hope they were one step away from the lifeboats. Again, that seems, every time something happens on a cruise ship, we're back to Leonardo and Kate on the Titanic. So this is an issue that, kind of every time something happens, it gets a little blown out of proportion. I mean, I'd love for there never to be a fire an issue on a ship, but it's a ship. It's going to happen, especially when you start packing 3 to 5,000 people on it. And again, if your situation is you're never going to cruise again, that's the option and everything. But again, I think you have to understand that their priority is going to be getting that fire out and getting the passengers out of harm's way as quick as they can. There were some other ones here. This one I really found interesting. Fire was reported in the aft on decks 4 and 5. It was reported as under control and we should be back shortly. Goes on, ship is now open for all access and activities. Crew is professional, quick, a little scary with the alarms and doors shut a little bit. And then there was this update right here. One guest reported, my husband and I saw smoke and fire embers from our 7th deck balcony a little before 8:35 p.m. We also noticed that the boat had come to a complete stop. That is not unusual. When you have a fire on board, you will basically want to stop, and so you don't prevent the spread of fire by wind and everything like that. Ran upstairs to deck 15 for a closer look and didn't understand why there was no announcement and why the deck seemed empty with no people. I think they closed the fire doors and were keeping people in the restaurant and theater around this time. Finally heard them announce the Bravo ×3 and later the Kilo ×3 closer to or past 9 p.m. I was having to message my family to ask what the codes meant. At some point, we realized our muster station access was blocked and we had no life jackets in our room. Okay, number one, you need to check. Can be clear. If you go on a cruise ship, number one thing you do when you're on board the ship is not hit the buffet, is find out where the frick your life jackets are. And if you don't have life jackets in your room, you need to tell somebody right away, because those are your life jackets. You need to make sure, and also make sure where there are life jackets stationed throughout the boat. I can't tell you, every time I go on a boat or a cruise ship, my first thing is I'm really kind of anal about this, is I'm going to make sure where the life jackets are. I'm going to make sure how I get from my stateroom to the outside to the weather deck. I always have a portable flashlight I plug in so that if the lights go out in your room, especially if you're in an inside cabin, you have a portable flashlight because it's dark in a hallway of a ship. Let me be clear about this. And so you can figure out how to get out. That is something that is, it's the ship's fault for not having life jackets in your room, but it's also your fault too. It would have been nice to have more information about where to go and from what. I was in a panic for at least an hour. I will also say that this goes on. I could see the fire from my balcony about 30 minutes before an announcement was made and was panic due to lack of acknowledgement instructions. I tend to think then this fire was down on the stern of the vessel. Again, back here where smoke was venting out through those areas. We've seen fires on aft mooring stations of these vessels before, and probably an electrical fire of some kind, if not involving mooring lines, ropes, who knows what. But the smoke would come out. You would see embers in that way. That would kind of explain why this was being seen. It goes on here. No excuse for withholding information that may put someone's life in danger. People have a right to be informed as quickly as possible. Yes, they should be. But were you paying attention? Were you listening? Were you in an area where you could hear the announcements? But again, all of this comes down to having a little bit of safety and knowledge going on a cruise ship. Cruise ships sink. I hate to tell you this. Everything sinks. Whatever you build will sink. We tend to forget this, but at the same time, going to a hotel can catch fire. Resorts can catch fire. I mean, driving a car. I mean, there's always hazards we're associated with. Do as much as you can. It doesn't take a lot of time to understand where your life jackets are, where your muster station is, how to get out from the interior to the vessel to the weather decks, open areas outside the interior of the vessel, and how to navigate the vessel safely without using the elevators. I always, when I sail, try to get on a middle deck so that I don't have to use the elevators too much. So I'm, midway from the top deck to the bottom deck. Get yourself some exercise, work off the buffet by using the stairs, and be able to maneuver yourself around. Understand when they do those lifeboat stations, it's really important you understand where you're going to it. Also understand you're not getting in a lifeboat, everybody. Believe it or not, cruise ships don't have enough lifeboats for everybody. Yeah. You think we learned this from Titanic, but nope. They use life rafts too. And so you may be at a life raft station where you're going to have to go down a slide into your life raft. Yeah, get ready for that. That's an issue. And let me be clear, if you don't like where your muster station is, you can change it. You can ask to be changed to a different station, especially if you have someone who has some mobility issues. Hey, I don't want to take him down a slide. I need to get in a lifeboat. Make sure you have that set up. And if there are concerns that you think something's going on, head to the weather decks at all time. Get out of the interior of the vessel, head out to the weather decks, and that's always the safest position you'll be in. Make sure you have a couple of egress routes to get to the boat deck or to head to the upper decks to get you out of problems. But remember, fire on board a ship is a serious situation. The crew is going to respond to it, and the crew will be suppressing the fire. Remember, the first goal in firefighting is extinguishment, but if you can't extinguish it, you prevent extension, and it takes some time. You're in a big, huge metal ship. Heat radiates through metal. So they're going to make sure that that fire is not radiating above, below, to the sides, fore and aft. So they're going to make sure they got everything contained. And understand they are fighting that fire. A lot of great images came out recently of a fire on board a Carnival ship up in the stack. That happens with carbon buildup in the stack sometimes. It doesn't explain why they didn't do the preventative maintenance to make sure it didn't happen. But, a fire in the stack is not going to lead to the ship burning down usually. It's just great videos. I hope this provides a little bit of context to what happened on board Quantum of the Sea. For those of you who are on board, obviously it was scary, and I'm not trying to minimize that at all. But again, know that the crews are aiming to get that fire out, suppressed as soon as they can, because again, nobody wants an issue with fire expanding on board. If you enjoyed today's show, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the channel. You do that one of two ways. One, you get the super thanks button below, where it allows you to contribute directly to the channel, which allows me to put this channel on, or you can become a patron of the channel by heading on over to Patreon. You'll see the link pop up here at the very end of the video. Click that, and you can join with either a monthly or yearly subscription to help support the page. Till our next video, Sal, signing off.